I noted that Rachel began her presentation with a big apologia that she wasn't a librarian nor an archivist nor an information specialist, yet for I think the vast majority of the people in the room and the vast majority of people who are interested in this area, there's a whole move towards what is being called in the UK and the US digital curation, which is bringing all of these disciplines and tasks and interests and concerns together in a very much in a multidisciplinary way of dealing with digital sources. And I hope to address some of the main themes of, I suppose, the digital curation movement in my presentation. So the kind of things I'm hoping to look at will be technical infrastructures leading up to digitization and repository systems. There's lots of vocabularies and slang going on around this, but digitization, preservation, all of these things are processes, they're dynamics, they're workflows, they end up somewhere, and invariably and increasingly they're going to end up in repositories. I want to just maybe address some issues around humanities research requirements, the party political broadcaster, that is the IVRLA, and then make some general observations and conclusions. So just by setting the scene for technology, this is the new iPod iTouch, which can now carry pages from the Michael O'Cleary collection in UCD. But we're definitely living in a world of convergence. So, you know, we're used to the ubiquity of the mobile phone, of multimedia, of text messaging, of interactivity, of blogs, of wikis, you know, of being networked either wired or wirelessly. And what's really converging are, I would argue, digital sources and digital services. But just before looking at sources and services, just give a quick overview of, I suppose, networks in general and the internet in particular. And the kind of things we see in networks are, we see communication systems for to and fro communications such as email. We're seeing the increase of things like virtual worlds. We've dissemination systems such as mailing lists. And then I suppose information systems or an information place, which is, I suppose, the ubiquitous World Wide Web. The web, if we talk about the early days of the web, we say Web 1.0, was essentially a document delivery system. It was dial-up, it was very narrow, it was narrow band, there was thin content. Yeah, there was great advantages. It was usually 24/7 access, as long as the person at the other end of the wire decided to update his or her web page. It was international, and it was human readable. It was based on HTML, or hypertext markup language, and I suppose the biggest limitation, though, is that it was human mediated. In the last couple of years, we've seen a move towards what's being called Web 2.0. Again, no prizes for originality here. Tim Berners-Lee, arguably the founder of the internet, talks about the Web 2.0 as an extension of the current web, in which information is given well-defined meaning, better enabling computers and people to work in cooperation. That's key to Web 2.0. As an infrastructural level, we've got broadband, we've got fatter networks, and we can take fatter content, so we're getting multimedia delivery. Instead of just being information-orientated, Web 2.0 is becoming service-orientated and application provision. So it's designed for computer programs, it's designed for computer systems. It uses a whole load of different technologies and techniques, which if you're playing Scrabble, you'd ask to put several letters back, but you've got things like XML, resource description framework, you've Java, you've Ajax, you've these different services and computing programming languages. Probably most fundamentally, it's computer readable. We're moving into the semantic web. And allied to that is what's being called the social network. In Web 1.0, the user was a consumer. We went to a page and we took content, we read it. But in Web 2.0, where users are creators, they're contributors. And the old Apple adage of rip, mix, burn. We're no longer content just to buy the CD or just take what's being given to us. We take what we want from the various sites and services and sort of bundle it all together. The kind of tools then that we would see in Web 2.0, we see blogs, we see wikis, we have various RSS, we get feeds, so content is being pushed to us depending upon our interests, our requirements, the setup of our web browsers. Tools like Flickr are being used for sharing images with our friends, with colleagues. And again, we can tag these with metadata and with terms that mean something to us at the time. We have various bookmark sharing sites like Conatia on an academic level. Probably on a broader level is something like Delicious, which allows user mark tags for bookmarking web pages, which can be shared with others, so you can see what bookmarks your friends use, and you can copy them and you can distribute them. And again, going back to that idea of computer-mediated content and computer-readable content, we have things like mashups where we've got Flickr and Google Earth or Google Analytics, where different tools, different thin applications get used to give a meaningful web experience. So all of this, like again, we've been saying a lot that it's an exciting time for digital humanities. It's an exciting time for the internet because we're getting to a level of maturity in some of these systems, in some of these ideas. And then how do the sources and services, and again, I'm talking from an Irish humanities research perspective, get used in this domain. The kind of sources that are out there, and I suppose this is skewed more or less towards historians, but we've got primary sources and secondary sources. So we have access to scanned text, scanned images, we have electronic editions of texts, and then the secondary sources. So you could have online bibliographies, there's gazetteers, there's online access to theses and dissertations as we have in Tara. And then the kind of services that these sources can be subjected to include, this is very much a sort of a brainstorm, but image manipulation, so we can zoom, we can pan, we can change the color, we can heighten, we can lighten or darken. We can create electronic text through optical character recognition. We can have collaborative viewing of images, and then collaborative blogging or discussion through instant messaging. We can have automatic translation services, annotation and tagging of images, again based upon individuals' interest, research query, observation. What I find very interesting is georeferencing, because everything is usually limited by time and space. So how do we put geotags onto images or onto text or onto people? And then data mining, text mining, and then I suppose data set management and manipulation. And again, the goal with any of these services is how do we introduce services? How do we introduce added value that is, I suppose, computer readable and I suppose Web 2.0e, if that's a technical term. But all of this is really about new opportunities. These are points given by Graham Murdoch at a recent conference, but bringing it all together, he says, like, we've got new research resources, so it's participant-generated content, it's collaborative research, there's new research sites, we have synthetic worlds or MMOGs, massive multiplayer online games, new forms of scholarly communication and engagement, and what's bread on my table, new digital repositories, which are networked and searchable, which again are two very important attributes. So I just want to talk a little bit now about digitization as a process and repositories as a home for the end product of those processes. Very much, and the issues surrounding things like digital capture, digitization, cataloging, repository setup are very much dependent upon the user requirements, as Rachel was outlining, then the issues and the goals of the institution that is either funding or hosting the digitization or the repository. So I suppose the issues surrounding digital capture include selection criteria, so at its most basic, what are we going to scan? And then the technical standards around that, like what kind of parameters we're going to use for scanning, if we're going to create electronic text, what kind of markup selection we're going to use, what are our metadata standards, what are the user requirements, and then long-term preservation requirements. And there's no black and white in all of these. There can be an awful lot of, I suppose, officially we can say debate by various user groups as to what they want, what the information specialists consider paramount, etc. So there can be a degree of dialogue and discussion and to achieve consensus on this. But the end result of any digitization process or any digitization task is the creation of a digital object. And this is a very generic breakdown of what a digital object is at its most basic, it's data. It's a set of bit streams that gets subjected to some kind of service, aggregations of which are annotated to create the digital object. So you could have scanned pages that get aggregated together into a thesis, scanned pages that get aggregated together into a book, scanned images that get aggregated into a photo album, and then the annotation can be whatever the various selected metadata standards. Metadata is, I suppose, the archivist or the librarian's bread and butter, but basically, metadata breaks down into lots of different areas. And as I say here, and what I was saying about in Web 2.0, about it enables people or computers to know what kind of resources are available, which is very much a discovery role which traditional libraries or archives play. How to interact with the resource, how to play or open it, what's its provenance, where does it come from, are there any related resources, so is there any kind of recommendation service that can be applied, and then the perennial bugbear of rights is what are the policies governing access, governing use, governing storage. And because metadata is such a problem or is such a challenge for any kind of digitization or digital repository project, and particularly in the humanities, because the humanities have a wide range of content types. If you're dealing with material from the hard sciences, you can have very, very large data sets, but they're generally quite uniform. So, a complete DNA sequence happens to be 12 terabytes in size, but everything you're looking at is just parts of DNA. Within the humanities, you can have all different types of content. You can have material in different languages. You could be collating and collecting scans of pages, texts, photographs of archaeological objects, etc. And you can have different cataloging models for each of those. And because there can be a lot of different standards, the problems here can be poor cross-searching, limits for interchange both within repositories and between repositories. Not so much today, but certainly going back maybe 10, 15 years, the problems were that the metadata was tied into the repository of the database system. So you would have proprietary packages, which meant when those packages stopped being supported, you had to migrate your data into a new format, and there was costs of conversion. And all of this meant that there was little chance in the creation of the virtual library or archive. In the last number of years, we've seen a general convergence in metadata towards those based on XML schemas. I know Niamh would probably argue with me when I say that there's an acceptance that Dublin Core is insufficient to describe the growing range of variety of content. But there is a general feeling, I suppose, qualified Dublin Core gets used, and there's other metadata standards that are increasingly being taken up within Ireland, within the UK, within Europe, and within the US. The Library of Congress has taken a huge lead in the creation of XML schemas. The ones that they're championing that they support are Mark 21, MODS, which is Metadata Object Description Schema for Digital Objects, METS, which is used for the transmission and the structural metadata for digital objects, and EAD, which is Encoded Archival Description, that is very much used within the archival domain rather than the library, but I'm going to say a bit more about that in a minute. Other kind of metadata standards that are out there on a more technical level, there's MIX, which is metadata for images in XML, Premise, which is a digital preservation metadata data dictionary, and then there's MPEG 21, which is used for audio and video. It's a full-time job just remembering half of the acronyms. But anyway, so you do your digitization, if only it were that easy. But eventually your digital content and your metadata has to reside somewhere. And as I say, in the last number of years, we've seen a move towards repository systems. This is not a photograph of UCD's IT hub, I hasten to add. This is, again, kind of a brainstorm of a taxonomy of the different types of repository systems that are currently in vogue. And it's important to say they're not all mutually exclusive. They're different labels because we handle digital content differently, and it's easy to look at the repository in which they reside being seen as maybe intellectually separate rather than physical. There's digital libraries and archives, which the IVRLA is one. It's essentially a home for digitized primary source material. Institutional repositories, again, Tara would be Trinity's example, is a home for the either digitized or born digital intellectual output of a university in general. Learning object repositories, we've got the National Digital Learning Repository in Ireland, of which I think every third level institute and university is a participant in. And again, this is holding scanned images and content for use in teaching and learning. The big challenge here is issues of copyright and probably of cataloguing. Then there's data repositories where we've got the Irish Social Science Data Archive in UCD, which would hold like census data, sort of very large data sets, but again, quite uniform. And then probably the final one be electronic document and record management repositories, which are again large databases which would hold the administrative output of institutions, government departments, city councils, etc. So these are the kind of places where Word documents, PowerPoints, Excel documents, emails, etc. would all be stored for corporate oversight and for transparency, and probably for transfer to a national archives following a suitable period of retention. In the last number of years, we've seen a growth in, I suppose, open source repository systems. So rather than buying proprietary commercial ones like by Oracle, we've seen a number of third-level projects essentially take flight, grow wings, have a large take-up, and are being used increasingly in commercial organizations and in commercial ventures. The advantages of these is cost, because they're usually free. There's growing user communities, all of which have listservs and wikis and twikis and blogs, etc. So there's great flexibility in customizing them and using them. And there's this sense of ownership, of being part of a community, of contributing, of maybe developing some functionality for one of these open source repositories that you feed back into the community. The disadvantages are a lack of dedicated support. So if you have a problem, there's no 24/7 hotline. They can be difficult to configure, usually requiring some specialized knowledge of code and programming. So again, that goes back to a funding issue. There can be problems with versioning because you're dependent upon the community to update and version the repository software you're using. And if you're tied in, if some of the systems you've developed are tied into an earlier version and the community decides, well, actually, we're going to release a new version, you can have problems in maybe updating some of your tools that you've developed. And the most popular repository systems out there are Fedora, which is Flexible Extensible Digital Object Repository Architecture, which is a bit like Ronseal because it does what it says on the tin, if you can remember what it says. There's DSpace and ePrints would be the three big ones that are being used at the moment. There's probably about 8 to 10 different open source repository systems out there, but these would by far and away be the big three market leaders. So the next thing I just want to probably look at is humanities requirements for digital technologies and for digital repositories and digitization work. Sorry, I'm just getting my page. Yeah. So again, humanities computing requirements, and this was probably, these are broad general conclusions based upon conversations, surveys, and talking to various people in some of the third level institutions. Humanities, they use the broadest range of content. So they want to see, they have a research question and they don't really care what source they need to support or to argue their case. They use a number of linguistic and symbolic structures, so there really is no lingua franca. Humanities researchers need long-term access to digital sources. I was talking to somebody who's a cardiologist recently, and he was asked what was the oldest article he would read in his field, and he said, "Oh, I wouldn't read anything older than 5 years, because the field in medicine updates and changes so quickly that to keep currency, you only want to go back that far." Humanities, if you're researching something in the Middle Ages, well, obviously you want to access sources from the Middle Ages. If an article written in 1900 can be as relevant as an article written last week, so you need that long-term access. The whole idea of trust or evidence is very important. You want to know that what you're looking at is authentic. You want to know that its integrity is there. And again, this goes back to some of the notions that were being discussed earlier, the idea of a source as being part of a collection, and I'll say a bit more about that. Then researchers, they want to develop an interpretive layer above the sources. So in the same way that we're talking about technical services atop sources, the interpretation of sources is the bread and butter of humanities research, because a linguist will look at a source and interpret it in such a way, a historian will look at the same source, interpret it in a different way, depending upon their research questions. Both questions are valid, both interpretations are valid. We want to be able to keep those interpretations and maybe bring them together in a way that neither researcher was aware of in the first place. And again, the interpretations, they're time and query bounded, so we need things to be time and date stamped. We need to be able to know what question was asked that resulted in the interpretation. So I suppose the researcher in Humanities 2.0, the researcher is a contributor. He or she is not just a consumer. The researcher is a collaborator and a member of a social unit. If it's not MySpace or Facebook or Delicious or Conatia, it's whatever tutorial group he or she is in. It's whatever thematic PhD he or she is working within. The researcher is an intrinsic element in the research process. The use of technology to enable this added value. Humanities research, I would argue, a lot of it is based on that conversation. It's the informal, it's the cup of coffee, it's did you see? I was reading this article, and by the way, I thought of you. And it's, you know, hopefully in a good way, but it's making explicit the implicit connections between and among sources. And I will argue in the next few slides that the IVRLA goes some way in its current guise in meeting some of these requirements. Just by way of background, the IVRLA, it's a pretty horrendous acronym to try and get your mouth around, but we come really, really high on Google hits because nobody else has it. But we're a PRTLI funded project. We're a component of UCD Humanities Institute, and we're based in UCD Library. And we would have three main goals, and one is supporting research through offering access to digitized content. So, you know, we do this digitization thing, we do this cataloging thing, we do this repository thing. But we also do direct research into best practice in digitization, in formulating standards for digitization, and looking at best practice for digital repositories. And then developing and promoting added value tools and services. One of my big mantras is I want to move away from electronic paper. Electronic paper is very much kind of, you know, you see it on the screen and you can read it. How do we add value to that, and how do we create spaces and layers that will allow researchers to interact and intersect above those sources? So again, this is just by way of example. I said in my slide on digital capture that we had, you know, selection criteria was important, or are important. And sort of some of the issues that we looked at when we were selecting content to digitize. We digitize content from 4 repositories in UCD. So we've UCD Archives, which is primarily historical political papers. We've UCD Special Collections, which is a wide range of collections. We digitize content then from the School of Irish, Celtic Studies, Irish Folklore and Linguistics, which holds the National Folklore Collection, and the Irish Dialect Archive. So across all of these, we wanted to have a complete spectrum of media content. So images, text, hierarchical collections, linear collections, audio, video, data sets. We wanted to check if there was an extant digital version. If one existed, then we wouldn't digitize. So, for instance, we're digitizing a lot of 19th century political pamphlets rather than 18th or 20th century material, because when we went looking, we saw that a lot of 18th century material was already available. We looked for intrinsic research potential, both within the collection as standalone. So we went to the various schools and said, if this collection was available in digital format, could this be used in research or teaching and learning? But also, we tried to kind of pick collections that we knew there was some crossover or relatedness between the collections. Collection size was an issue as well. For instance, we've scanned the Eamon de Valera papers in photographs. Now, we scanned the papers from microfilm, both as a standalone mini project to see how it would work, but also because we calculated it would take about 8 person-years with one scanner to just scan all of the de Valera papers, because there's some 120,000 scans. And you couldn't put them through a drum feed because of their fragility and their vulnerability. Again, physical condition, risk of damage during digitization was another issue. We got source repository input and, where possible, source school input into the collections that we were going to digitize. Ideally, we wanted a catalogue or a finding aid so that we had some information about what we were digitizing rather than going into it blank. But for reasons of completeness, we are actually digitizing some material where we don't have any catalogue information about it, and it's part of an archival collection, and it's causing hair loss on the project is all I can say. But, you know, we're going to get a small research chapter out of it, and that's good as well. And then copyright or other restrictions. If we knew there was a collection that was very, very contentious, there was little point in us digitizing it. The IVRLA is very much skewed towards access within a research environment rather than preservation, but I'll talk a bit about preservation again. So some of our repository requirements then, when we went to look at these DSpace and ePrints and Fedora, where we wanted things like audit trails and data stream versioning, we wanted persistent identifiers, we wanted some way that we knew that there was a validation technique and control over everything that we ingested into the repository and that we stored within it. We wanted whole object versioning. Again, we were looking at this more for kind of for the future rather than for our current requirements. So if we, for instance, archive a website and then that website updates, we want to bring in a new version of the website. And we wanted compliance with the Open Archive Information System and, you know, at least in theory with the Trusted Digital Repositories. And then going back to, I suppose, our interface that we wanted to sit on top of our repository. We selected Fedora, by the way, as our base repository architecture. And then the interface that we're actually developing and customizing ourselves is probably best explained by the twin pillars of evidence and conversation, which is, I suppose, Lorcan Dempsey's description of research. So the evidence is you've got to have provenance, authenticity, integrity, collection, hierarchy, etc. A degree of granularity, so if somebody is interested in a page, they get the page, and then some security, authentication, and authorization infrastructure. Then the conversation or participation level, again looking at how we support collaboration, personalization, customization. We've got 2 joint venture projects going on with the School of Information and Library Studies and the School of Computing Science and Informatics. Again, we've had similar challenges when talking to computer scientists. There's the cliche that computer scientists, create a solution and go looking for a problem to fit it. And it can be very difficult to sort of go to them and say, we have a real problem here, can you help create a solution? But one of the things that we're very, very fortunate that a UCD researcher is doing work on recommendation systems, like what you have in Amazon. 10 people read this book that you're just buying, which is all very, very well established in an e-commerce environment, but has never been looked at in a humanities environment. So we're trying to do 10 researchers looked at this particular document that you're looking at. We think you'd also like to look at this one as well. Also, with the School of Information and Library Studies, the notion of social searching and annotation. So rather than individuals searching for content and annotating, but how do we go at it collectively and collaboratively? And there's an SFI-funded project on that, which is part of the OJAC system, and we're a test bed for that. So the metadata standards that we're using, essentially if EAD had an M in it, it would work really well, but MODS, METS, EAD, MIX, and MADS are the ones we're using. That's the worst thing about these things. They just pull a whole load of letters together. MADS is an interesting one. I'll talk a bit about that in relation to the Digital Humanities Observatory. But these are essentially metadata authority files. So, and very, very useful because a lot of our content is Irish language. So we can create an authority file that says, instead of Dublin, put in Balliol Clia, or if there's nuances in name spellings or variations or how people have nicknames. And again, a lot of our content, particularly from the folklore collections, it's very, very localized. So you can have the same person. We've got one case, we've got one man referred to under 20 different names. So an authority file to be able to, authoritatively search for content where he's the subject or he's the author is very important. One of the very interesting things that we've been working on is our collection model. And again, because we've got library and archive in our title, and because we actually try to fulfill the functions of both the library and an archive, we've tried to create a collection model that fuses both ways of accessing content from these 2 traditionally disparate sources or traditionally disparate places. The traditional way of accessing content in a library, you go in, you have an OPAC, you type in your author, your title, it says it's on this shelf, and off you go. Traditionally then with archives, you use a finding aid, so you get a Word document, you browse through it, you get item descriptions as hierarchical presentation of content, you try to define or restrict or limit the particular items you're interested in, you fill out a call slip and folders come back to you. What we've tried to do then is create a hybrid model that has both the searching and the browsing. So you can search for content, or you can go in if you're not sure what you're looking for and start browsing the various collections. So the model facilitates both that top-down and the bottom-up approach. So we use EAD or encoded archival description for our context and structure. And that brings us down to the item level. And once you hit the item level, we have a MODS record for the item or the object, which gives us accuracy and precision, allows us to hang subject terms off the items. And then we create an EAD template for each collection, and then we catalog to the appropriate level. The things we're doing here that's quite interesting is we create EAD for non-archival collections. So our stuff coming out of the library, we create an EAD record for, an EAD collection record for. I found out very recently that the Library of Congress are looking at doing this. So I only hope that they ended up reading about it on our website, but we'll wait and see. I think we probably came to the same conclusion, I think is the most gracious way of putting it. So I'm just going to go through a few slides of the IVRLA 1.0 repository that we launched last month. Going back to my twin pillars of sources and services, 1.0 is very much source heavy. It's about getting the architecture and infrastructure correct for the sources. Later versions that we'll be releasing, we would hope to increase the degree of services that we have on the repository. So this is essentially our home page. You can see this little fella here saying get Deja Vu, which is a proprietary file format that we use as our default file delivery system. We use Deja Vu for a number of reasons. One, it's highly compressed. Our average scan, which would be a TIFF file, is about 80 megs in size. Our JPEG of that is about 5 megs. Our Deja Vu of that is about 150K. So it really shrinks it down. Deja Vu also has a plugin for your browser, a bit like the Adobe plugin, so you have a lot of functionality there. There's some added functionality that Deja Vu has over Adobe, which we like. And ironically, when we're talking about access and open archives and all this, Deja Vu is proprietary, so there's a degree of control over what can be done with the Deja Vu file. You need to have the Deja Vu browser to use it, which, again, in terms of we would be a virtual holding area for content from the repositories, meant that when we were talking to the repositories, we could ensure that there was some restrictions on the technical usage of the file that we were making available. So this is, once you agree to our terms and conditions, you get into our homepage and then essentially get into our search and browse page. So again, we have a tabbed page here. So, you know, we have a Google generation. They used to just a box, search everything, bang, away you go, and you pop in, you get your search. This is our detailed search page then, which has a lot of, you know, fine tuning for searching. So over here you can do limitations, and it all bleeds through because of the mods records behind. So if you select that you want to restrict by text, then the genre list that shows up will only show you text restrictions. You've got the various fields here. We've got, if you pick a name, then it opens up the Library of Congress role codes, so you can pop in the role. We also have this bit here that's quite nice. These are dynamically created subject headings from the repository. So we have Library of Congress subject headings, and then all our name and our place lists and our titles. So again, if you were to click subjects, you get an A to Z here, so you can browse through it. This gets updated every time a new collection gets added to the repository. So you pick the subject you're interested in, drops it into the box there, and then you hit search. Then the other side would be the browse side, and this just gives you an idea of our browse page. So what we have here, these are links to collection info, links to the repositories, and then straight into the collections. You can see when we release version 1, we have 13 collections available. So we've got 19th century pamphlets. You can see we have watercolours, we have maps, we have Excel files from the dialect archive, we have manuscripts from the dialect archive, we have monographs from the O'Clery Institute, we have ballad sheets. We've got 2 archival collections from the O'Curry and Frazer collections. Then from folklore, we have the Emigration Questionnaire. We have the Tinker's Travellers Questionnaire. And we've got some of the Urban Folklore Project, which is an audio collection as well available there. So if you click on collection info, you get quite a lot of very high-level collection description, which is all pulled from the collection EAD file sitting within the repository. So you can see the kind of information that's coming up there. There's biographical history, arrangement, processing. Again, it's a lot of evidential weight behind what you're looking at. Then if you want to go into browse the collection, you can see here, we're currently teasing this one out. We've got 2 options. You can either have a flat list, which we're going to show in a minute. This is the EAD contents and structure. So you can actually see the hierarchy that we give for the collection. We'll be rolling this out, I would say, well, it's next week. So there'll be a table of contents at the top. You click on if you're interested in personal matter, brings you to that section. Then you just click on view, and it'll bring you to the object within the collection. Currently, what we have up is a flat list, so you see something like this. Again, it's similar to the image database that Rachel was showing. So you've got a thumbnail, you've a title, a date, and then whatever media type it is. So you click and you view, and you get this page. And this is our, I suppose, the crux of it. This is the rib. This is the digital object layout. So you've got your context view here, which is again dynamically created from EAD. So each time you call up an object, it kind of goes off and does its family tree. and goes running back up through the AD file and can see that it's part of this sub-series and this series and this funds and this collection. And again, probably next week, these will all be hyperlinks into those various elements within the collection. This is the mods record here. Then you can, if you click on contents there, you've got the options for downloading the various data streams. We offer, as I say, Deja Vu, where we've got the permission of the repository. We offer JPEG. In the cases of images, we also offer mixed technical metadata. And then you could click over here to access the object. And again, it opens up within the Deja Vu toolbar. So again, as I say, very much like a PDF. You can save or print or search. If it's a printed page, it performs OCR, so you can search for text, you can search for words. You can cut the text, so you can copy and paste it into an article or a thesis or a paper. And each object has its own bundled Deja Vu, so you can actually, if it's a pamphlet, you just open up the one Deja Vu file and you can read the entire pamphlet. Then the other things that we have bookmarking on Delicious, as I was saying earlier about is, so you can share bookmarks. So if you were doing work for a lecturer or for a thesis supervisor, you could bookmark a lot of content within the IVRLA and then send an email to your supervisor with the bookmarks, so he or she could then just look at them immediately. We use Handle for our persistent identifiers, similar. I think Tara uses Handles as well. And then we've got our Library of Congress subject headings here, which are all hyperlinked. So they search automatically across the repositories for content with the same subject term. So again, you click on it, it will give you back a return page. So you can see there we've got 2 things from William Frazer and 1 thing from the 19th century pamphlets. What's very exciting for us, we just found out last week, as I said, we're very much based around access. And even though we do very, very high level scans, we've been keeping them offline. We just got funded for the SUNRE project. I have to look up my notes to remind me again what SUNRE stands for, which is the Secure Online Networked Repository of Archival Information. And SUNRE will be a 50 terabyte capacity long-term preservation repository that meets OAIS and TDOR compliance. And we're looking at basing it on the premise preservation metadata data dictionary. And this is very, very exciting. It's very much early days, but we're really, energized by it and by UCD's commitment to putting, additional funds into this as a part of digital infrastructure. So just to sort of give some general observations and conclusions, I suppose user requirements, give them what they want or what they think they want. I'm a card-carrying archivist, and in every conversation I've had with any academic or researcher, it's content, content, content. That's what users want. And they don't really care what it takes to get it in there. You can explain about evidence and best practice, et cetera, et cetera. They want the stuff on the screen. So, there's a constant education, there's a constant PR, there's a constant having to, sort of negotiate and liaise so that you are making sure the collections you make available meet the broadest range of humanities user requirements. And again, we turned down digitizing some collections because the number of people who said they would benefit from it, you could count on one hand. Because, as Rachel has said, as I will reiterate, digitization is expensive. People are expensive. The process is expensive. Creating and maintaining links is important. And again, this is on a technical level. If you can't find it, then it's not there. If you can say, it's available, it's on the internet, but if people can't be brought to it, then it might as well be not there. The worst case scenario in the analog world is you can search the shelf. You can actually physically walk through all the shelves and find it. I know I put the Book of Kells somewhere, but in an internet networked world, you can't do that. You have to know, you have to be able to find it. So, that's very, very important. Sharing with others, and again, this is it. We share not just content, but we've got to be increasingly want to share our objects. I was very interested, Rachel was saying about creating virtual collections, and this is something we're doing as well. So people can create a collection based upon their research interest, regardless of provenance, regardless of media type. So how do you then share that collection with others, or how do you share your annotations or your comments? And context is intuitive. We know the page is in the chapter, is in the book, because I'm holding the book in my hand. if you don't have that level, in an online world, it's very easy to lose that integrity and that intuitiveness. And convenience is a given. We have Google generations. People presume they can sit down, they'll type something into a little box, they'll press enter, and they find it. And you're up against that a lot of the time. In a networked environment, again, as I say, links are currency, and Rachel was saying that earlier. Where you appear on hierarchies, how far up the food chain you appear is important. Interesting thing that we've been finding is we have related items within mods. So we currently create those, and they're done manually, and that's been very interesting because the catalogers have, through the cataloging process, discovered relationships and relatedness between items but from different collections because they've just worked on different collections, which when I brought back to some of the researchers who were interested in these areas were never even aware that in some cases that other repository even existed. But how do we get the interfaces to make the links? How do we facilitate users to make the links? Or how can we even ask computer systems to make those links? The golden fleece of all of this sort of stuff is linking not only within your repository or within one system, but between systems. So that repository taxonomy I showed earlier on, how do we then enable somebody to search across an institutional repository, a primary source, digital library and archive, so they get the primary source, the secondary sources, and then even the tertiary sources, the observations, the comments, etc., and can bring it all together as part of a research query. And all of this, and this drives librarians and archivists a bit mad at times, but it means looser control over specialist terminology. So, one person's church is another person's ecclesiastical architecture. We've a big challenge, and one thing that we're releasing in a future version is our content from the National Folklore Collection is not we catalogue it according to the Library of Congress, but folklore catalogue it according to the Handbook of Irish Folklore, which only the National Folklore Collection use. Now, that is a very, very real way of accessing the content for them and anybody who goes through that school. But anybody who doesn't have that training, it just doesn't mean any sense. So how do we make that handbook available as a controlled vocabulary that allows those subject specialists tag and annotate? Again, a lot of like what Rachel was saying earlier. Just some, I suppose, very broad observations as we progress merrily towards this digital Ireland. I would argue that we're actually going back to the stage of wandering scholars, because if sources are available electronically online, we don't need to follow the sources. Who do we follow? We probably follow the expertise or the people who we think can help us interpret the sources better. There's no need to go to UCD to access the dev papers because they're in the IVRLA, for instance. So where do I go, or do I need to go anywhere? So then we've got huge decommissioned silos. Again, like I think it was up on eBay recently, there's a Minuteman silo in Utah or something that is up for sale. We have a huge amount of digital content in proprietary systems using proprietary metadata sitting probably a bit like Rachel's slides, going yellow in a bottom drawer, but they're on CD-ROMs or they're on 3.5-inch floppies, and there's been a huge amount of money gone into them and there's been a lot of time gone into them. How do we get them off that, and how do we get them into some kind of open system? There's a whole new hermeneutic of access and the open access movement, which a lovely Frazer was the archivangelists. So going around basically evangelizing about the role of archives and repositories and the need for these systems and the need for these standards. And that's very much, probably the big thing of all of this is we need shared and agreed standards in terms of technical systems, in terms of metadata. One thing we've done in the IVRLA is we've made our workbook available online on our website, which outlines our digitization processes, outlines some of our cataloging processes. So again, very much to say, this is what we did. Please don't reinvent the wheel, but if you can use it, give us a citation, or use a bit of it and alter it, or come and talk to us about it. We need this broader horizon, a new means of description for connectivity, because information professionals will never have enough catalogers or archivists or librarians to catalog, tag, annotate digital objects to an acceptable, perfect standard. So how do we broaden that horizon without losing that level of sophistication or that level of granularity? The DHO, the Digital Humanities Observatory, and the HSIS projects, one of the things I think we need there is a national authority register or national authority registers. And again, this is something where I think the cultural institutions should come in and play a role as well in partnership with the DHO. And again, as I said at the very start, this multidisciplinary input and commitment to digital curation. Archivists and librarians bring their own specialization in how to handle information objects. Researchers, academics bring their own specialization in subjects. They're not mutually exclusive. They shouldn't be at loggerheads. But we need to be appreciative and sympathetic to the nuances of the various disciplines and to computer scientists as well, I hasten to add. So just to conclude, virtual libraries and archives, they facilitate the sharing of sources, and I would hope as much as possible they facilitate the sharing of evidence. We want that they should be enabled the leveraging of value from those primary sources or those secondary sources, and there has to be some input in terms of long-term access and preservation. They promote communities of researchers, and again, you're not tied down by geography or by time zones now. And again, I think it's like this hermeneutic of access, the use of primary source material at all levels of research and teaching and learning. So not just about third level, but also secondary and primary. The new secondary history curriculum has a huge thing about the use of primary sources in it. We're looking at people, 500 first-year history students in Theatre L and UCD would never be allowed access into UCD archives to see photographs from the De Valera collection, but they can be given a URL, they can be given a handle, sitting there with a laptop in the lecture theatre, and they can look at the stuff there and then. The middle layers of meaning, they need to be generated and they need to be preserved. And there is still room for serendipity in this networked e-world. So further information, I would say our dissemination website, ucd.ie IVRLA. Please go. There's various bits and pieces up there, and the repository is ivrla.ucd.ie. So thank you very much.